and welcome back. We're so excited to have you all back for this next session at 2 o'clock. Just as a reminder, for those of you that are new joining us just now, you have the Q&A in the box to your right. If you have trouble with the feed at any time, you can always hit refresh and it will reload so that you have that feed option to watch. We're also going to have polls in chat, so keep engaged. We have a lot of information to cover and we have several presenters on this call, on this session, so we're really excited. One key element of placemaking strategy is that you have to know what you have in your community before you know how to go forward and make a plan. So this session is all around community and cultural assessments and very different ways and strategies of doing that. We today have 2 examples to showcase, one from Missouri and one from a community in rural California. So I'm going to introduce our next presenters and then they're going to take it away. Lisa, feel free to take it away, you and GK, and share with us what you have to say.
Great. Thanks, Melissa. I'm actually going to turn it over to my colleague, GK Callahan, and he's going to get us started here.
Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for being with us this afternoon. I'm GK Callahan, and this is Lisa Oberhauser. We work for the University of Missouri Extension, and the 2 of us run a statewide community arts program called the Community Arts Program. Lisa, you can go to the next slide if you don't mind.
Sure.
Our program is a 3-way partnership between MU Extension, which is our land-grant university arm, the University of Missouri, and then Missouri Communities to promote and foster community and economic development. Next slide, please. Oh, this is you. Go ahead.
Sure. So one of the main things that we've done over just the past couple of years, actually right before COVID hit, is a curriculum called Passport to the Arts. And this is it's a process. It's a community development process that's designed to connect local stakeholders in order to build and strengthen arts-based community and economic development. And it's a process that ideally will take a 1.5 to 2 years, something like that. We have some pictures up there of some work we did. The large picture is a tour we did of Hannibal, Missouri. We were contacted by them and we did an asset mapping for them to start the process. And then over to the left, we worked in Augusta, Missouri, which is a smaller rural, very small rural community just south of St. Louis. So this process has 3 parts to it. One is the initial community planning, and that's where we get stakeholders together. The second part is the community organizing and event engagement, where we have an event, an arts event that's designed to gather input from the community. And then we have long-term community development based on those results that we got. So that's in a nutshell what Passport to the Arts is.
One of the reasons we brought up this program today is the beginning of this program is based on assessment. So like Melissa said earlier, you have to know what you have in your community before you can move forward. So we always start with 3 main, well, we begin this process with 3 main type of assessments. We do this initial interest survey. So we find out how interested people are, how many people in the community are actually interested, and it's a pretty simple 1-page survey. Then we go into a more in-depth survey that kind of lets us understand where the community is at. We run it through like a Qualtrics or a Survey Monkey, and it's a more in-depth, long sort of readiness survey. And then we go and we do the in-person asset mapping, which is what we're really going to focus our conversation on today. So when we were doing the in-person asset mapping, we thought about, why do you do this? How do you do it? What are the results and next steps after doing this process? And then we're going to give you a few examples. So starting with the why. So the why is really important. It really gives the community itself a broader picture, a more comprehensive look at what's going on in their community. It uncovers resources that you might not think of assets. I've often tell this story. I've gone into a community and they never mention like the giant lake that's right next door. And you're like, why don't you talk about the lake? And so, it's just reminding them that they have assets in them. So you get numb to some of the things that are in your community if you live in it on the day-to-day basis. It also creates a sense of pride and really helps start to engage people. So we use this as the really jumping off point when we're doing a project. The asset mapping really gets people involved and you get to think about all the fun, positive things of your community. And then it shows us who's not at the table. Lisa and I have been at several asset mapping sessions where a certain group, maybe like a hospital or a community organization, was brought up over and over again, but no one invited them to the session. And so it really gives people an idea of who was missing and who needs to be involved in the project as we move forward.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the how, and the way that we conduct assessments, the asset mapping, is we try to use a community capitals framework. And I think that probably most everybody who's tuned in probably knows what that is, but just as a kind of refresher, this is a framework where you're identifying different community capitals, and there are 7 pictured here: built capital, financial capital, political, which I like to call civic capital, social capital, human capital, cultural capital, and natural capital. And those kind of come together to create a healthy ecosystem, a vital economy, a sense of social well-being. So I have some resources listed at the end where I pulled this diagram from, and it's listed there. So we conduct our asset mapping using this framework, and it can be a little bit tricky to use this framework. And I know I've learned a few things. The first thing I want to point out is it may be really subtle, but there's a difference between an asset and a capital. A lot of people use those interchangeably, and it's not necessarily something that can be interchanged. So Emery and Flora define capital as any type of resource that's capable of producing additional resources. When resources or assets are invested to create new resources, that's when they become capital. So that's kind of helped me as I go through this process. And the other thing I want to point out is using this framework, it can be a little bit tricky deciding what one asset, which bucket it goes into. I've sometimes heard that this framework used as kind of a bank account, where you have, you know, the built capital is one bank account, the financial capital is a different bank account. What are you going to draw? What are you going to withdraw from each of those bank accounts to ultimately create this kind of thriving ecosystem? So that's why I say putting into the right account can be tricky. And let me give you an example. If you have a bank, that's obviously a built capital because it's a bank building. So you can have that building that can be used, but you also obviously have financial capital that comes from the bank. And you may have other kinds of capital as well. So it can be kind of tricky deciding which kind of bucket each of those assets can go into.
But I also would like to say that I think it is very helpful using this sort of framework, because if you just get a bunch of people in the room and you say, tell me your assets, they either freeze or they don't know where to go. And so if you can structure it where, let's think of all the natural resources you have in your community or all the cultural assets you have in your community, it really helps kind of focus the conversation. And so you don't lose them along the way.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we go through this. The other thing I wanted to say about the how is there are other ways of categorizing and mapping. And GK is going to talk a little bit about that too. He's been involved in some of that. One example is just constructing an inventory of assets, which is not quite the same as a asset mapping with community capitals, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. And GK,
so, you know, what do you do? So why you kind of talked about why we do this. Now, what do you do with the information? So the information is great for using for reports, for advocacy, to move forward, for granting applications. It allows the community to come together and strategize on next steps and needs and wants. So once you look at your assets, you can see what your deficits might be in the community. It allows you to create a database that could be utilized for multiple other organizations besides your own. And then it tells all kinds of stories. So those are some of the ways that you can kind of take it to the next step. So one of our first examples, and this is an urban example, we know we're talking about rural placemaking at the conference, but we just wanted to point this out. I've been involved in a multi-year project with our local arts council here in Kansas City called Arts KC. And one of the first steps to the strategic planning was helping them put together this arts asset. But like Lisa said, it was more inventory driven. And one of the reasons the difference between rural and urban is in an urban setting, because the population is so dense, it's really hard to hold lots and lots of focus groups. It takes tons of manpower to get all this data collected when a lot of that data exists out there. So using EMSI data and IRS tax exempt data, and our local arts council's own resource data, we were able to put together this large inventory map. This is in its early stage, but if these slides are sent out or you want to write down the link, you can click on the link. It'll take you to All Things Missouri, and that's a really nice interactive platform where we've placed this map, but then you can overlay it with other types of data to tell stories and show pictures of how the community is developing with the arts, along with the arts.
So the second example that I'm going to talk about is we conducted Passport to the Arts in Augusta. That was actually our pilot community. And that is a rural community of about 170 people. And it's in southern St. Charles County. It's right along the river. It's right along the Katy Trail. And it's a winemaking region. So we were contacted by them because they wanted to develop an arts kind of infrastructure and ecosystem that was more than just about wine. So in this example, it was much more community driven. There just was very little data that exists at this kind of municipality level. We could find lots of county data at the county level, St. Charles County, but that would include, you know, much bigger cities in the county, and it just wouldn't really give an accurate portrayal of what existed in Augusta. So I've recreated that kind of community capitals framework there, the different capitals. And so what I'm going to do now is show you, we went to Augusta and we did in-person mapping, and we basically on sheets of paper, we just listed each capital, and we kind of prompted the community to think about different assets that they have in each of these buckets. And what I'm going to show you next, I know it's going to be very hard to read, but this is all the various assets that we came up with. And I know you can't read that. I'm going to kind of isolate out some of these things. But we have lots of assets listed here. But what I want to point out is that after this 1.5 to 2 year time that we met with them, they decided that they wanted to create a makerspace, and they wanted to do it in a park that was very nearby. So Klondike Park, if you go down to the bottom right there, the natural capital, one among the many assets that they listed were parks, and Klondike Park is nearby. It's sometimes considered outside of Augusta, but it's so close that they went ahead and listed it. So Klondike Park is listed as the natural capital. For built capital, it does run right along 94 Highway, which is a rural highway. It goes by Augusta. It's one of the main ways into Augusta, but it also provides an entry point into Klondike Park. For political capital, one thing they said was they had a very hard time connecting with people at the county, county government level. So they listed that as an asset that they would like to utilize and leverage. For human capital, they listed craftspeople. There's all kinds of artists there. It's a little kind of artist community, all kinds of volunteers. So those are some of the human resources that were listed. Financial assets, they have many arts classes. They have Harmony Verein, which used to be an old German kind of cultural center, a lot of German heritage in the area, and they've turned it into a performance building. And I say that as financial capital because one way that artists can make money is by offering classes, and the Harmony Verein can present performances and charge people for tickets, and then they get that money and it can allow them to do other things. And then for social capital, I listed the Chamber of Commerce events kind of department, a group of people that kind of was responsible for putting things up on the events calendar. And then for cultural capital, there were lots of cultural capital, but I specifically pulled out writings about Augusta as a kind of cultural capital, stories and news reports and things like that. And the reason I selected these specific ones out were these were the assets that were invested or are going to be invested to kind of make this makerspace come to fruition. So I just wanted to kind of give you an example of how different assets are utilized then to become capital and to invest in a makerspace, which eventually may become its own kind of asset that can be invested to, for example, we heard earlier this morning, people talking about projects that then yielded more grant funding and things like that. So that the makerspace in turn can become an asset that's reinvested in becoming a capital. So GK, I don't know if you want to add anything onto that. I went ahead and listed a couple of resources that I cited. The first resource, Mary Emery, Susan Fay, and Cornelia Flores, 2006 article in CD Practice, which is a journal, a practice journal. a journal of practice, I guess I should say. It has if you go to that resource, it's really useful because it kind of guides step by step into how you can use these tools. It talks about appreciative inquiry as well. And then the second resource is kind of the Flora and Flora, who developed the community capitals framework. So if you want to learn more about that, I've listed our contact information there if you're interested in contacting either one of us. And that pretty much wraps up our presentation. So at this point, I think I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mikey and Kimberly to talk about their Mariposa County placemaking project.
Cool. Thank you so much. Just a second. Pretty minor technical difficulty. All right. Thank you all for being here. And great presentation, Lisa and GK. I think a lot of similarities in our projects that we'll soon discuss. But yeah, I'm really excited to be here. My name is Mikey Goralnik. I'm the Community Design and Development Planner for Mariposa County. I'm here with Kimberly Garza, founder and principal of Atlas Lab. The county, as we'll discuss in more detail, hired Kimberly and her team to help us with the development of the Mariposa County Creative Placemaking Strategy, which let's dive into. So Mariposa County is a small rural county. I guess drop us a note in the chat if you've ever been there. But we're located in sort of the Sierra foothills and including the Sierra Crest. So our county is on a transect from the Central Valley. The western part of the county is, ag land, very agrarian, mostly ranching, up into around 2,000 feet of elevation with the foothills and the largest community in our county, which is the town of Mariposa. It's the county seat. Population, this actually is not accurate. The population is now around 1,700. Total population for the county is around 17,000. So very small population-wise, but very large in terms of landscape. And our big kind of draw, historically our big draw and our two biggest draws and biggest assets from a storytelling and in kind of a community development perspective have been our position in the southern tip of the gold rush, the motor lode. And so our sort of role as a gold rush community, the 1850 California gold rush, for those of you who aren't big football fans or don't know California history super well, and our proximity to Yosemite National Park. So we're one of the 3 gateway communities to Yosemite, and a ton of our economic productivity relies on essentially visitors, tourists who pass through our community on the way to another place. And so we have over the years really kind of leaned in or leveraged or some would say overemphasized the role, our sort of heritage and identity as places that were a place where you could get gold and a place where you can get gas and be close to the park, which has worked for us somewhat, at least economically. We're a viable place because of historically the gold rush and now because of Yosemite. But not only are those two narratives both extremely complicated, both in terms of justice and equity, diversity and inclusion, but also as climate change continues to threaten the sort of viability of the park as a safe place, what with fire and drought and other considerations, it's become kind of an imperative for us to kind of re-examine those things and consider other more inclusive and really locally, at least, more resonant and significant narratives. If you live in Mariposa, or in Mariposa County, not just the town of Mariposa, but in our county, you may have been to Yosemite a couple of times, but it's definitely not a part of your day-to-day life. Kind of like if you live in Paris, you probably don't spend a ton of time at the Eiffel Tower, but everybody knows you because everybody knows that about your place. So there are more resonant and representative and for local residents, compelling stories that we want to explore and want to tell, not just because they make our community more economically resilient, but because they engage with our sort of sense of place and our identity and our heritage in more meaningful and fulfilling ways for our residents, not for our visitors. And in so doing, by telling more resonant and compelling stories about who we are, we think it's more attractive and more interesting to visitors as well. So sort of a twofold benefit. Very ambitious project and a lot of things that we don't know how to do, or at least didn't know how to do initially. So the county applied for an Our Town grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, through which we were successful and with which we hosted a competitive request for proposals from consultants in our area to help us develop a strategy, will help us to ask people what those more resonant and more compelling representative stories are, and also help us synthesize the outcomes of, or the sort of answers to those questions into something that we could use and we could do things with. So Atlas Lab and Kimberly were far and away the most qualified. We hired them. We were very excited to do so, and they did a tremendous job on our project. So happy to pass things over to Kimberly to tell you a little about what we did.
Great. So when we started the placemaking master plan, we were really looking at how we knew we wanted to actually use physical placemaking strategies throughout the process to, one, highlight what placemaking is to the county, but also engage the community through, we use 3 different tactics that we'll talk about today. But when we initially started, we were looking at some sites, and I'm a trained landscape architect and a public artist. And so this was really fun. We started looking at low cost, lightweight, more affordable materials to use in terms of like having a placemaking project getting deployed throughout the county. And so we looked at a series of different ways we could create something whimsical and fun and get inspiration by the local flora and fauna. And in doing so, engage family, engage other folks that are just not tourists driving through Mariposa. And so we looked at a series of different ideas, whether they were informal pop-up stage, a pop-up kind of movie theater, a mobile art station. We kind of looked at different ways. And so these are just some vignettes that we thought of. But as we started to engage the community through this placemaking process, and we talked to the advisory group that was really, citizens, community members, business owners, and artists, along with the Arts Council itself, we decided we were going to really look at the Mariposa Creek Way. Next slide. And so similar to what GK had said about kind of assets right in your back door, the Mariposa Creek Way is in the center of downtown, and it's right there, but it's hadn't been really taken care of. Everybody kind of turned their back to it. And so it's infilled with invasive species, but we knew this would be the catalyst site and that we wanted to implement and have our placemaking strategies within this area. Next slide. So as we started to look and investigate this area, we started to look at the kind of plant material, and we discovered that this plant material was actually used to make baskets. And these baskets are done by the Southern Sierra Miwok tribe. And so we were really inspired by this, that here this plant material in this creekway really supported this beautiful way of living for the tribe. And we said, hey, like, instead of, we knew we wanted to kind of start, we were inspired by this, but we said, let's just hold off and let's actually talk to the tribe and see if they want to be involved in this process and part of the installation. And so again, the placemaking is really about how do we come into the table and talk to the community and really have more of a grassroots process to what the output could start to be. And so from that, next slide, we engaged the tribe and said, hey, we would love to kind of showcase basket making to the community, have it along the parkway. And so we learned that baskets are done by the women of the tribe only. And so what was great is that only one woman in the tribe knew the technique. And so she was able to share it with multiple generations, as you could see her from young to old. And it was really great because they were able to come together over several sessions in the community center and start to build their baskets and learn about the process. And it was great because they were able to sit as a group and share. It was really an act of coming together and learning about each other and just kind of sharing this knowledge. And so we really co-created with them. Next slide. And then we were able to just, we coordinated and essentially built this wood frame that would support and display the baskets. And so again, this was kind of done in a shorter time frame, but really kind of using low cost kind of wood frame, wood and metal frame. We were able to kind of display their baskets along the parkway itself. And it was just really a great moment where they were incredibly proud of their work and being able to share this with the community, and again, share different voices and perspectives that are typically hadn't been shared. And in addition to that, the signage itself that was posted along with this shared about information about the plant material, but also it had a barcode associated with it where people could, to an online survey, where folks were able to share their information and start to provide key information for the placemaking strategy itself. Next slide. So riffing off this, the initial installation, we then were able to do another installation further down the parkway from the Olama basket display installation, and create an installation called Seed Share. And this one where we were able to provide seed packets of that native plant material, have it along the parkway. And again, a similar kind of strategy where we were using education, providing key information about the creekway itself, and then again providing that barcode for people to, for the community members to share information. So it was doing a lot of different things in a very simple kind of structure. And then our third engagement strategy through this process was the This Must Be the Place social media campaign. So as this project kicked off during COVID, we switched gears from a physical installation to an online engagement strategy. So we had folks be able to share their favorite place or event within Mariposa. And this was all collected on social media and shared on Instagram. And then all that information and that data was collected, and it was really fantastic because it was like all the community coming together and sharing their favorite moments about the place that they live in while providing key information to this survey.
Yeah, so those three pieces, the Olama installation, which sort of centered local indigenous basket making practices, and Seed Share, which equipped people with native seeds for native plants that are found in the creek corridor, linked to this online survey, which allowed us to collect information, ask questions and collect information about people's priorities and preferences related to creative placemaking. So we were that coupled with the sort of more kind of subjective, qualitative information that we were getting from the This Must Be the Place activity, which, like Kim mentioned, prompted people to provide one photo and like a 2-line caption for what their favorite place is in Mariposa. We then sort of analyzed and qualitatively coded that information for what types of places people were sharing with us. So the outcomes from This Must Be the Place, plus the outcomes from this online survey, which had hundreds of responses, because it sort of challenged people, or at least empowered people to participate in this planning process from the actual site that we were engaging them in, rather than, at the whatever gym at like 5:30 on a Tuesday, some sort of stodgy, boring public meeting, which probably would have been COVID unsafe anyways. People had an opportunity to participate in a more leisurely way, and in a kind of more creative and innovative way, art-driven way, and provide better and more creative input on our creative placemaking strategy. So the types of input that we got really wasn't, I guess it wasn't that surprising, but it was definitely very definitive that people weren't really enthusiastic, or at least passionate about talking about Yosemite National Park, and they certainly weren't really passionate in talking about the gold rush. Those just aren't necessarily things that Mariposans really feel like constitutes our place. However, Other features that are kind of related to those two things, just like certainly around being outside, our natural environment, the sort of unique, distinctive foothills landscape, which is very different from the Sierra foothill, the Sierra crest, or the more mountainous granite terrain that you would find in the park. Those things all really stood out as being really important components of to Mariposans of our place, and provided us with really great cues, either themes or in some cases very distinct, direct recommendations for types of projects, creative placemaking projects that people wanted the county, the Arts Council, who was a partner in this project, and other local actors to pursue in the future. So one of the cool things I think about the survey, and these are also some of the quotes for the captions from the This Must Be the Place exercise, is that people really said some incredibly powerful things. I'm not going to necessarily read all of them, but I think some of them are really powerful and really emblematic of a lot of the responses that we got. That art should do more to express differences between and diversity throughout Mariposa County. Less about the gold rush, or at least its dominant colonial narratives, and more about the experiences and perspectives of people of color. A hometown is what the locals make it. We have the ability to create progressive conversation, rooted solidarity, and distilled passion. These elements lead to collaboration, and collaboration in a small town like this can lead to truly life-altering projects within the community. This community could rock. It could be so much more than just a stop on the way to Yosemite. Art is the first step. This is my favorite. I see mostly pretty pictures for the tourists and not much thought-provoking art in any form. We are too concerned with the creation of the idyllic small town and not the realness of life here. These expressions would spark and foster conversation and communication and begin the healing process, which is hardly ever pretty. So these are obviously very high-level comments, but like I mentioned, we did get, in addition to these more general philosophical, thematic question or answers or responses, we got really clear direction from the community on specific interventions that the county and the Arts Council and other partners could be taking to respond to and advance the themes and the big ideas that we captured through this art-driven engagement process. So this is just a graphic showing where some of those projects or some of those recommendations would be located in the town of Mariposa. So in this instance, these are strictly projects. And they're recommended temporary art initiatives, some permanent art projects, new public spaces, a couple new murals, and then what we were calling a strategic creative placemaking opportunity, which is just like this is like a synthesis or an opportunity for us to take lots of different ideas and combine them, like a really big, prominent sort of priority area. And the creative placemaking strategy breaks all of those recommendations down into recommendations in 3 priority categories. So there are 7 priority projects located throughout the county, not just in the town of Mariposa. 9, I believe, programs, 8 programs, and 3 new policies. So like ongoing, not tangible, but like legal or process-based or other types of modifications that we could make to the way that our community thinks about creative placemaking to achieve this vision and implement these ideas that were collected through this art-driven creative placemaking or art-driven community engagement effort around creative placemaking. And what's really cool is now that we have this really compelling community-supported document, which has been adopted by our board of supervisors, we have this really discrete roadmap for what to work on. And we've been working on it and been really successful. We've already received a new Our Town grant from this most recent cycle to implement several of the programs that are included in the creative placemaking strategy. Looks like we're going to get a ton of money from our state transportation agency, who just has money that they need to get rid of. And we have a ton of really cool projects kind of at the ready to sell them on. And a number of other initiatives that don't include funding. Some of the policies, for example, we're ready to move forward with them, and they're enshrined in and developed and detailed in this great document that we have. So that's kind of our process and what we did. So thanks for listening, and I'll kick it back over to Melissa.
Thank you all so much. So So next, I'd love if you all just stay on your camera, and I'm going to ask you a few questions. We have some good traffic coming in the crowd. Everyone's really enjoying the ideas you're bringing up. And I wanted to share the poll that we had on community capitals framework. So we have had 25% of the participants said that they have heard of it before, but 75% of it have not heard of this. So this is a new model, I think, that you've introduced to a lot of people to consider and learn more about as a way to engage their community. One of the questions we had around community capitals framework was someone wanted to know that they can see how it could be challenging to explain the difference between an asset or a capital. Why is it so important to differentiate between the two to the end user? Why does the group as a whole care about the difference?
That's a great question. And I think it is used interchangeably. For me, I think it, and that's all I can speak to really is how I, think of it. I think it clarified for me that their assets to me is more stagnant, like it's there, but it's not really, assets can be depleted or not used. If you have an old building, that's just sitting there, it's not really being invested. It's not capital. So I think it's just useful to kind of think about the differences in those two terms. It's also, assets can be tangible or intangible. And I think it can, if you think about it this way, it can create kind of consistency in how you think about the resources in your community. And, it can lead to some great projects. If you have elders in your community that have a lot of knowledge, community memory, and community history, if you think of that as an asset, it's just kind of there. And one thing we heard in Augusta was there's a lot of individual artists. It is a bit of an artist community, but they just kind of felt stuck. And they used the word silos a lot. There were people operating in silos. There's the Chamber of Commerce, there's the Plein Air Festival, there's, all these vineyards and things, but they're not really working together. So I think that using the community capitals and thinking of it as assets and resources that can be invested and work together can be really, really helpful. So the example of the elder knowledge, you could create a mentoring program. If that knowledge is actually invested and put to use, you can create something that you may not have thought of. So it's a great question, and it can be kind of tricky.
Thank you. For Mikey and Kimberly, so we asked the attendees when you were talking about designing communities for residents or visitors, and from the poll results we asked, is your community designed for residents, visitors, or both? And we've had 44% say their community is designed for residents, 46% say designed for both, and then 7% say they're designed for visitors. So I think what you said there did resonate with everyone on prioritizing the residents and designing in that way. We did have a question around the focus on whether they love the focus on the indigenous talent and the power and the creativity, as well as the nature-based connection. They did want to know, for the art installation, was the indigenous maker paid as a part of that process?
Yes. As part of the grant program, funds were allocated to them for the project.
Thank
You
you.
could also add that the frames, the Aloma and Seed Share edifices, we hired a local contractor to design and build those as well. So that was also money that went back into the community through our grant.
Well, thank you both so much. And I think we've had a lot of good questions about it. There was also some comments about using QR codes and incorporating those. And I think that gave some attendees an idea as well. As with the other sessions, if there's any more questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat. And I believe our speakers are going to be willing. I noticed, Lisa, you've already been able to share some information. And for those of you who have been asking if this information, the slides will be available, or the presentations, yes, we will have those available later. But thank you, all four of you. Thank you for joining us for this session. We really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Have a great day.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you.
Everybody.